headline caught my eye today. The headline reads, "Why Education Should Make Normal a Thing of the Past." And that triggered a series of thoughts that I thought I would like to share in this lesson about integrating technology. From the time I first began to use technology, I know I've said this before, but from the time I first began to use technology, I read articles and came to my own independent conclusion that in the end, the only way in which we could successfully maximize the gain from using technology was to start all over again and re-envision what education should be all about and how it should be conducted. Of course, that frightens and frustrates both parents and educators. More and more teachers, I think, are realizing what technology can do, but they're not equipped yet. And so therefore, one has to wonder, how do we go about equipping classroom teachers? And maybe I should change that, because maybe classroom teachers is a misnomer, because someday they might not be in a physical classroom. But how do we enable teachers to do what they do best with students without going back to the drawing boards? And that has to take place in the higher echelons of education. The board I worked for had a program of refreshing technology every year, working its way through all the schools so that every school got some new technology every so many years. It didn't take that many years, but it still took enough that 10 schools or 25 schools got 10 new computers, and then another 25 schools, and so on. And that was at the beginning. And that reinforces my idea that in order to think about how we get and use technology and how we get teachers to do that, we have to start at the top. There are a lot of teachers, I think, today who want to do more. They just don't know how to go about doing it. And so one of the things that a board or a jurisdiction or a district could do would be to pair up teachers. I always had these crazy ideas about projects. And way back when, in the early 90s, when we were starting to think about students making web pages and teachers using websites and all of that, I started to encourage and created a field study to see whether or not this would work by visiting a group of schools who had previously volunteered to enable me to help their teachers learn how to create websites. I was the consultant for computers in education. And so I went from school to school and I met with teachers and I talked to them and I gave them advice and I answered their phone calls and I answered their emails and I spent time above and beyond the normal workday. And I guess that's where I'm leading with this. In order for us to accomplish this, before everything comes flying down in our faces, everybody's going to have to work harder and spend more time collaborating. I read in the press, in the educational press, and we see it on CNN and in the newspapers, how many students and how many parents and families are going hungry, and how money is being put into food banks, and how school districts are trying to make sure that the kids that used to be fed in school still get that food. That's just one aspect. It all begins with money. And unfortunately, for too many jurisdictions in the United States, states were just not prepared to put money into what needed to be put into. There needs to be money put on the table for teachers to be able to go from school to school instead of having a classroom of their own and having to do all of this extra work above and beyond the call of duty. There needs to be more money put into teachers and administrators collaborating together to think about how to re-envisage schools. We know, for instance, that there are 10 months of the year when schools are used day in and day out. But there are 12 weeks in the school when the schools are closed completely. That's a huge waste of a public investment. If students are going to have to be at home and working online some of the time, and I shouldn't say if because I think that's what will work best, then those schools don't have to be closed 2 months of the year. Students can work when they need to and take time off when they need to. One of the other articles I read was about just-in-time teaching to help students catch up. Education can't be seen as a series of boxes being filled up by students, and those students sitting in those boxes for so many hours a day, and then going home for the rest of the day, and coming back the next day, and that's it. Because that's not how we work. We learn when we're interested and when something strikes our fancy that we want to find out about. So that means we have to envisage how to make all of that happen in what we've already got going on. That doesn't mean that we have to tear down the schools or we have to tear down the classrooms, but we can rethink what that school looks like and how it's used and whether or not teachers are in a classroom 5 days a week, 5 hours a day from 9 until 3, or from 8 until 12 or 1 or 2 o'clock, and another group of teachers later on, and then students coming for help and meetings with their teachers, and then students going out. The earliest classrooms were groups of students with a teacher, meeting to talk about things or to be tutored. And then there were tutors that went out and helped students with their skills. Maybe that's what's going to happen. But the whole idea that after the pandemic is over, we're going to go back to some normalcy that existed in the past is foolish. We now have opened the Pandora's box of all the things that are possible and all the ways in which we need to work at making it more possible. And we can't shut the box down and tell everybody to go back to what there was. Now is the time to think about how to implement those changes. And they won't happen overnight, but they have to begin now. Because the technology and the way in which we live in society, people taking vacations when it works for their workplaces, parents and students rather, being at home for more hours during the day, and one parent in one room and another parent in another room, and the kids all in their own rooms. And people looking for houses with more space so that they can access time, they can have spaces to work, all of those things. If you took education and you put it in the middle of a circle, and then you try to think of all the different ways it's going to change, then you need to have task forces to look at what needs to happen. And the guidance has to begin from the top. It can't be blue states versus red states. It can't be rural states versus urban states. It can't be cities versus counties and so on. It has to be all done together. There will be no normal again. Normal is evolving. And until we start to capture that wave and ride it, all of these issues will continue and we will continue to have problems. So catch the wave and ride with it, not fight it.